So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, we did actually start with the part about riba, and we said that riba in Islam is actually two kinds. When one is an increase in the amount due to the change in date, or due to being delayed in terms of when everything was paid back. In other words, an increase in the amount because of a certain delayed timing for the payback. Okay, so an increase in the amount. The other, which is riba nasi'a, that's related to the date. So if you basically owed something, all right, it has to be returned with the same amount, not any higher or lower amount. All right. So here's a question. What if I wanted to be thankful and actually give you an increase? So you gave me $10,000. I managed to make a business out of them. And yes, I returned the $10,000, but I wanted to also be thankful and actually increase in the amount. I wanted to do it just on my own. So I gave you $10,500. I wanted to be thankful. That is a sunnah. Yes. So that is a sunnah, but on a condition that you would not condition it on me. You wouldn't put it a condition on me, that I would do it on my own. So I wanted to be thankful. I wanted to be thankful for giving me that loan. So I gave it to you for $10,500. All right, for example, or 11,000. All right. All right, that's actually a sunnah. Now, the other type of riba is actually called riba al-fadl, and that's basically the difference in making a difference in certain items. And we said those items were gold and silver, barley and wheat, dates and salt. So salt is basically referring to minerals. So certain minerals, not all minerals. Okay. So in other words, we're looking at certain items that you cannot actually do a change in the amount, even if that was due to a different kind or a different quality. At the end, we're looking at the weight. So if you had dates of a certain kind, you're going to have to basically do the same amount, and it has to be at the same time. You can't give me at a different date. Same thing with gold, same thing with silver, and so forth. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. We also talked about this ayah in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually bring المحق. What is المحق? المحق, in where it will actually bring a destruction. So whether we're talking about, the person would usually think that if there is riba, that somehow that is going to bring an increase, and that is going to bring some form of financial advantage. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing it here in where clearly saying that no, it is actually going to bring an economical disadvantage and a financial disadvantage to the person. And it's worthy of mention here that there are a number of different things that Islam focused on money, and how some will actually think that it will bring an advantage, when in reality it will bring a disadvantage. Some of those things are really not connected. It would be interesting to really see why. Like, for example, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, whoever wants that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would increase in their rizq, increase in their wealth, فَلْيَصَلْ رَحِمَهُ, then they should visit their rahim. What is a rahim? The word rahim really means womb, but it's not that you're visiting your womb. It can be referring to the womb, and it could also refer metaphorically to women, to the female relatives, who are female relatives that are biological female relatives. So your aunt, and regardless of their faith, by the way, all right? So your aunts, your sisters, all right? Not the milk sisters or milk aunts, or not the milk. It would be good to visit them, but they don't take the same ruling as biological relatives, all right? In other words, you want an increase in your money and in your business, go and visit your sister, visit your mother, visit your aunt. So why visit them? How is that related whatsoever in an increase in your business, an increase in your income? All right. Is it that the person is getting a barakah, just a blessing through that? You know, you would think of energy working within one way, in where, yes, if it's money, then that would actually mean I have to do some form of an investment. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that no, that investment, even in money, you may not recognize how the energy works, but some of that energy you would actually get through your own female relatives, where you're giving. And that giving is actually bringing in the rizq. Is it literally bringing in the rizq or the blessing? According to the hadith, it literally is bringing in money, not only the barakah. What's the difference? So if we're talking about bringing in barakah to mean bringing in a blessing, that would actually mean that when a person visits his sisters, for example, his aunts or his mother, that he's basically getting the value of what is even more important than money, the blessing of relatives, the blessing of love. That in itself is more valuable than money. So there's the blessing. All right. In other words, what money cannot buy. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. We'll come back, inshallah. The rizq for a person, the person's income. So the other opinion said that yes, it does. And their evidence for that is that when we're looking at forces, we would usually think of an energy or force or any type of a work, and we would think that that is what brings income. So Islamically, that's not what brings income. This is one reason that helps bring income, but rizq is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not from the actual force. And therefore, what the scholars, those other scholars that interpreted that by doing silat al-rahim, that you just have to go beyond the simple understanding that in order to bring in an income, that you have to do a certain force or a certain energy within and towards making money. And that they considered that the energy does not, and the energy that brings the rizq is not necessarily just the energy that works towards the business or the income, but the energy that brings it could also be the energy that you do towards family, that you do towards good, that you do towards making good manners, bringing in a social relations, etc. And we even see that you would donate $500 and then the second day you're like, oh, you just got $500 as a gift. And this happened to me many times. You would get, or you would need $500, and $500 is what you would get in replacement to probably get a stipend, a gift, or whatever have you. And in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that brings the rizq. Other things that bring rizq, or another kind of rizq, the rizq for health, or even to uplifting calamities. And where the Prophet ﷺ clearly mentioned that if you want to uplift a calamity, pay in donation. That in order to uplift a calamity, so what kind of a calamity? Whether we're talking about health, wealth, or even just different things happening within your family, that use donation as a way, yarhamkumullah, use donation as a way to basically redirect not only the way you view the musibah, but to redirect the forces that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings you rizq. So you're investing, and that investment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings you another type of a rizq. We usually think of, if I would put in an investment inside, for example, a business, that business is where and what brings me rizq. And that's why I always want to remember that rizq is not just in the money. The rizq, I know I heard something from there, but I'm looking at it and but the rizq is not just in the money. The rizq is actually in what money brings, even, right? Just like we always say, you can buy a bed, but you can't buy sleep, right? You can buy insurance, but that doesn't bring you security, right? You can get married, but that doesn't necessarily bring you a happy marriage, right? You can find, and this is something that I always say as well, many times the girls or the guys, they would search for certain qualities in a husband or a wife, thinking that if I asked for a PhD or somebody with a degree, that they would be understanding. Not necessarily. Education and degrees don't necessarily bring in understanding. That's a different thing. They might actually think, I want to get married to somebody that is rich. But being rich does not mean hospitable. Hospitable is one thing. And same thing, when we're looking at money, it doesn't necessarily bring in stability. Financial stability is not necessarily the money. You can be very rich, but be in a lot of debt, right? There's no barakah. There's no barakah, no blessings. And then it all goes away. It does, but ir-rahim, of course it does. But ir-rahim is mainly directed towards women, the female relatives. Why not the male relatives? Because usually the female relatives, you don't expect that much of a focus in money. All right? So guys are more focused on money. This is real. Guys are more focused on money. And that's why, for example, many times, I would tell girls this: when you want to get married, get your father involved, because they would be straightforward. Let's talk about numbers here. But for women, many times she's looking at, what's your favorite color? Why? How is that related to marriage? But whatever. What's your favorite song? How do you spend your leisure day? Are you romantic? Wallahi al-azim. But once they live life, that's when they recognize that, oh, maybe I was supposed to be talking about how much money they were making and how they manage their financial life. And most of the times, and I get this often, by the way, that girls are actually shy to bring this up because they were afraid that the girls or the guys might actually see them as money hungry. And they don't want this guy to run away. So they start asking about other things. But for her father, no, we're going to be pragmatic here. Let's talk about numbers. Let's talk about what matters in real life. Let's talk about business. And let's go into details about that. So girls, don't get married without your wali. They will be straightforward. And don't be embarrassed by your wali. They will let them talk man to man. If this man that's coming to ask for your hand is not capable of talking man to man, homosexuality is haram. Sorry. Lesbianism is haram. If he can't be a man, I'm straightforward. Straightforward, you guys. right? All right, let's continue. يمحق الله الربا ويربي الصدقات والله لا يحب كل كفار. I think we talked about that. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. And إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات, we talked a lot about ayat that are similar to that. Does that mean that there is repetition in the Quran? So scholars actually debated whether there is repetition, especially when you're looking at, for example, Surah Al-Rahman, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Was it that it was repetition, or was it not necessarily a repetition, but there is a context? So even if we're looking at فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, it would be referring to what the context of that ayah was talking about within those ayat. So it's, if I were to tell you, see, I told you, for example, and then you were talking about something else, and I said, see, I told you, and I said it again. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm constantly repeating myself. It's, well, the first time I told you, see, I told you, was that the food was in the fridge. The second time I told you, see, I told you, to tell you that I left the car in the right place, or in the parking lot, or whatever it is. The third time I told you, see, I told you, was in order to tell you that I had, I don't know, $2,000 in my bank account, for example. But yes, although it's the same word or the same sentence, but it was actually in a different context. So is this the same thing? Is this what this ayah would be, and we're not necessarily a repetition? So I'll just let that debate, I would say more of that debate, whether there is a repetition or there isn't a repetition. All right, I'll let that debate be more, directed towards the context. Inna alladhina amanu. So inna, verily, the ones who believe. So again, here's always those two sides in where faith, aqidah, and action. But here there's that emphasis in where aqamu as-salah wa atawu az-zakah. So what is aqamu as-salah? Aqamu as-salah, to really perform the prayer. Atu az-zakah, to give the zakah. So why did it actually emphasize on the zakah and as-salah here? Well, that is in order to connect it with, well, in order to actually live the wording of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to stay away from riba, or to stay away from any type of a sin, that this is part of actually doing and implementing the pious action. The pious action includes two things. The pious action actually includes two things. Why were you guys shy to say it? I know that there was something wrong, but I couldn't figure it out. And I'm like, maybe she forgot the cookie that was supposed to entertain her. Okay. So, aqamu amilu salihat. So when we look at amilu salihat, there are two things that relate to al-amal al-salih. So amilu salihat means two things. One, to do and to leave. So to do actually means to perform the actual good deed. To leave is to leave sin. So amilu salihat, when we say amilu salihat, you cannot say this is talking about performing an action. So amilu salihat, part of that also includes to abstain from sin as well. So whether that included leaving the major sin, whether it's leaving associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether it's leaving riba, interest, or whether it's leaving killing, or whether it's leaving false witness, or whether it's leaving magic and black magic, or whether that was leaving uquq al-walidain and disrespecting parents, or whether that was leaving stealing or drinking, etc. That's still part of amal salih. All right. So when we say amal salihat, it's not to only include performing a certain act, but it includes as well abstaining from the sin as well. Got it? This is really important to mention, because there are two things, even when we talk about sunnah fi'liya and sunnah tarkiyya. What is that? So when we say something is sunnah, okay, sunnah fi'liya or sunnah tarkiyya, what is that? So even when we look at sunan, or the obligations to do certain things, even when we speak about sunnah, there is sunnah fi'liya, something that the Prophet ﷺ had done. What did he do? Oh, he basically used to drink, say Bismillah, and drink with his right hand. This is a sunnah fi'liyah. Did the Prophet ﷺ assign a female mu'addin? No, he didn't. That's a sunnah tarkiyah. So to not do, the sunnah is that he didn't do it. Did the Prophet ﷺ have the means to actually hire or assign a woman to do the adhan? Yeah, there were a lot of women for sure. Then that actually means when he didn't do it, that is the sunnah tarkiyah. Since he didn't do it, then that would be the sunnah. And this is very often that people would tell me, you know, I want a text that says that women cannot be the mu'addin. I said, yeah, no, it's actually the opposite way. It's bring me a text to prove that it can be done. Why? Because in Islam, when we're talking about ibadat, they are tawqifiyya. What does tawqifiyya actually mean? Tawqifiyya actually means that you cannot do unless there's an evidence to prove that you can do. This is related to worship. Is that the same when we're looking at mu'amalat and transactions in general? No, the total opposite. So in worship, everything is do not do unless you have evidence. Everything else, everything is halal unless you have evidence to prove that you cannot do. You see, you understand what I'm saying? You guys understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. So everything is supposed to be haram unless you have evidence in terms of mu'amalat, in terms of human life, transactions. Go ahead. Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving, that's a good question, is something like Thanksgiving, birthdays, all right, anniversary. Is that part of ibadah anywhere you cannot do unless you have evidence? Or is that part of adah? Wait, you guys understand what I'm saying? There's a difference. Hold on. Let's do this, okay? Let's go over here and actually try to see how are scholars actually thinking about this and why would they even think differently and what are we missing, all right? So let's do it. Now, let's do this little math. Ready? So if something is a ibadah, means it's worship, all right? It is tawqifi, meaning that I have to have evidence to prove that you can do. If it is aada, meaning it's related to culture, related to human, just a human behavior, it's nothing to do with the religion, then in that situation, everything is supposed to be halal unless proven otherwise. Everything's supposed to be halal unless you have the evidence to prove otherwise. Now, when we look at Thanksgiving, is it part of aada? Birthdays, is it part of aada or is it part of ibadah? Now, the scholars that said, we've got an evidence to prove that it's actually within this category. They said, since the Prophet ﷺ actually told the Sahaba that you cannot, that when they had actually said, let me tell you the context. So the Sahaba were celebrating a certain celebration that they were used to within their culture. All right. The celebration was not necessarily a religious celebration, just to know. It was more of a cultural celebration. What was the celebration looking like? So they would make good food, they would dress up, just like today. So the Prophet ﷺ tells them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had replaced those days or those holidays for or with two holidays. Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. The Eid after Ramadan and the Eid after Hajj. So the scholars that said that this was a ibadah, they said, here's your evidence. One, this hadith. Two, is that since it basically is an anniversary, something that we do every single year, that actually makes it part of ibadah. The scholars that said, no, this is not a ibadah and this is a aada, therefore it is permissible. They said, we've got our evidence, is that this is not related to religion. So if you had a habit that you do every single year, that you would combine your people and your friends, and we celebrate the day you graduated, the day you were cancer-free, you would celebrate. The day that you got married, you and your husband would go Madagascar, right? Yeah, Madagascar, not Madagascar. Where else would you want to go? Madagascar, Madagascar, alhamdulillah. All right, so in that situation, those scholars that said that this is aada, they said, if it's not related to the religion, to the ibadah, then this is related to people's actions. So things like birthday, that it's yours, it's not related to worship. Thanksgiving, it's not a religious thing, and that it's ad. So how did they respond to the hadith that where the Prophet said that no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually replaced you with 2 days? They actually said that those days had a pagan origin. You see it? They said, yes, it was a cultural act, but it had a pagan origin, and which is why they related it to that hadith. They interpreted that it was actually related to ibadah and not ad. You guys see what I'm saying here? Yeah. You see what I'm saying? I'm just laying out the differences of opinions in order for you to understand. When you would ask a scholar and he would tell you, no, it's a bid'ah. The one that would tell you it's a bid'ah means that it's related to ibadah. And the other scholar might tell you, it's not haram, it's not a bid'ah. That's because they related that it was had. You guys understand that the whole, I'm just trying to lay out the whole debate so you guys don't get confused. Like, why are we...
So when something they say something is from pagan, like is that like related to aid also when something is coming from atheists, whereby like
pagan is not atheist, because pagan religions. So what is pagan? Religions are actually 3 different kinds. There are the monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and there are the pagan religions. The pagan religions in where they're basically religions that Hinduism, all right, shamanism, all right. So those religions, they basically consider that there is a God, but things can become a piece of God. In other words, a cow can have the spirit of God, and then they'll worship the cow, for example. And they're the atheist religions. Atheistic religions are different because for the atheistic religions, they don't believe in God. So they would actually replace it into traditions. So traditions like, for example, Taoism and Confucianism, Buddhism, they're atheist religions, atheistic religions. They don't believe in God, but they will consider that whether it's Tao, Confucius, or Buddha, that they had certain wisdoms that they had done through lots of worship or lots of contemplation that led them to learn or get an inspiration that doesn't necessarily relate to God, but it would probably relate to other things in nature to replace God. So that's an atheistic religion, and that's why they will have different. That's why they will have different interpretations. For example, when we're talking about the aftermath of life and what happens, and do people actually go into reincarnation and so forth. So it depends on which religion. So when we're looking at pagan, that's a totally different thing than atheistic. So the pagans were not atheistic. The pagans did believe in God. So even the idolaters, the worshippers in Mecca, or even in the Arabian Peninsula, they did believe in God, but they just believed when they were asked, why would you worship the idols? They said, "Ma na'buduhum illa liyuqarribuna ila Allahi zulfa." They just said, well, we just worship them because they get us closer to God. They have the inspiration. They contain God's spirit. It just reminds us of the good. Same thing when you look at the different idols. Some idols were to commemorate a certain figure that was selling soup or passing out soup in Mecca. Another figure was in order to commemorate a love story, Isaf and Naila, where they had actually fell in love, and then the society, they refused to get them married, so they did committed zina right next to the Kaaba. They commemorated that love story by actually making an idol for them. Another idol was to commemorate evil. Another idol was to, and each one was to commemorate a certain force that they considered was going to be relating to God. Very similar to Hinduism today, in where, there are these certain, the untouchables, each one is supposed to be doing a certain thing. So if you wanted to worship, for example, to get fertile and get babies, you would have to go to certain priests that would be untouchables, and they're the ones that are responsible for that. You can't do it on your own. You would have to go through them. All right. So did I explain that? Okay, good. Okay,
What were you saying? In terms of a question about Thanksgiving?
the part about Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me go back to it. Okay, what am I saying? I'm just laying out the differences of opinions between scholars. What do I regard as the preponderant? I regard the preponderant is beyond this conversation and beyond this debate. And I think what is more important than this debate is really man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Whoever imitates any group of people, then he is part of them. And this is really often that happens, in where man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum is beyond the ibadah and the adah. Because the second that you imitate any group of people, even in the adah, all right, without you recognize, we see this all the time, even throughout history. You see it even in social studies, and you see how people, when they're living within a certain society, or when a group of people would be around them, and little by little it goes farther than ada, and that not every ada, and not every, what ada means tradition, and not every tradition is necessarily to be embraced simply by saying, oh, this is not necessarily related to faith, so you don't have to make it a big deal, without you recognizing when you embrace a culture in so many different pieces of it, you little by little lose your own identity. Simple as that. I personally believe that the conversation is bigger than this, especially as Muslims living in the West and living as a minority. We at many times don't recognize that to simplify the conversation and the debate into these two is really dangerous, because we are a minority, and the Prophet ﷺ ordered us to focus on preserving our identity that is far beyond this. What does preserving our identity actually mean? It's not just in clothing. It's not just in names. It's not just in an institution. It's actually in every detail of how you embrace even the cultures, the commemoration, the lifestyle that you're living, etc. So it actually goes beyond. In where the Prophet ﷺ was many times saying, what would the Jews do? What would the Christians do? And then the Prophet ﷺ would say, well, no, you got to do it differently. And unfortunately, what we don't recognize that many times is that as a minority, we're adapting we're adapting in so many different ways that everybody's like, yeah, well, I'm actually part of the society. I'm not telling you not to be part of the society, but I'm just telling you, make sure that you don't blend your own identity where it gets lost. Because you've got, exactly, because you have, as a Muslim, you've got a mission. What is the mission? La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. You've got a mission. What is that? The mission is to actually carry the legacy of all the prophets and the messengers. That's the mission. The mission is to implement the word of the Lord Almighty. The mission is to implement and live the principles of the Lord Almighty. And the mission is to remember that throughout history, the story is always the same. Even the way the prophets throughout history. Remember, we always say this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us the story of the prophets and the messengers, even though the story might actually be told in different ways, from different angles in the Quran, but you're asked to repeat it on and on and on. But the story is the same. Not the same, because the story is just to tell you, this is how the story begins. How do you complete your part of the story? We always say this. How do you complete your role? And in all of those stories of the Anbiya, there's always the identity by time and how it gets blended in with the society and how the word of truth is forgotten. Why? فَخَلَفَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ. What happened? You've got another society, another generation came after them. What happened? It blended with the rest of the society. They left salah and what? اتبعوا الشهوات. And they followed their own whims. Their own whims. How do whims actually come in the way, and why do they actually alternate our identity? Well, because we basically forget that the narratives are replaced with what is justice and principle. Narratives can be زخرف القول غرورا, and that the shayateen would actually do a lot of that beautification in, let's say, redefining different narratives. And what does it do? It basically creates a delusion in people's minds. And this delusion in people's minds takes them into a different area where they don't recognize the realities of the world around them, because it was given a different name. It was given a different name. Once it's given a different name, then it creates within you a different approach. You start embracing the new name, alcohol, spirits. What does it do? It will change the matter of fact of it. It's giving you a spirit. It's giving you some form of an ecstasy. And then the way you relate to it is different than drunk. So then when you get drunk, you're just getting spiritual. Okay. This is the reality. You're getting spiritual, when in reality, you actually lost your mind. You actually got intoxicated. You lost your mind. The most important thing about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, the most important thing that differentiated you from an animal, your intellect. Your intellect. والله لا يحب كل كفار أثيم. Oh, where were we? وأقاموا الصلاة لهم أجرهم عند ربهم. Here we go. This is where we left off at. لهم أجرهم عند ربهم. So they would have their reward. Reward for what? For doing two things. One, being on faith. عملوا الصالحات, to do what is haq in terms of action, whether in doing or leaving or abstaining, to perform salah. But isn't al-amal al-salih, why was this al-amal al-salih, good deeds, it's supposed to include aqamu salah and atu zakah, to do the salah and do the zakah. Why would it say it again? It's an emphasis. Just an emphasis. Just like, for example, you might say, clean the house, don't forget to wash the dishes. It's an emphasis, just because I would know you probably leave out the dishes. So I'll just say it again, just to make sure that you don't say, hey, I thought you just meant clean the house and I didn't think the dishes were included. Okay, it happens a lot, right? Yeah. Someone knows who I'm talking about. لهم أجرهم عند ربهم. لهم أجرهم. What is the reward? أجرهم. But is the good deed a compensation for the good deed? Is the reward, sorry, let me rephrase my question. Is the reward in compensation for the good deed? No, it's not in compensation for the good deed. So how do we understand it? That the Lord Almighty said that they would get their reward. So the reward, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually made an oath that he would not punish somebody that associate partners with him. He followed his Lord Almighty, submitted to him, and that the Lord Almighty will not punish him because he submitted to him. And that he also had made also the oath and even made it clear that the Lord Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi. I had forbid oppression on myself. In other words, the Lord Almighty forbid on himself that he too would have to be just. And therefore, he had promised whoever believes and actually does good, that the Lord Almighty would give them the reward for that deed. What is the reward? وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. So they would get the reward. Two, that they would not, there's no fear on them. So here's a question. When you say there is no fear on them, what is that supposed to mean? Other people would live in fear. The masses, all people are going to be living in fear. But the mu'mineen are not going to be living in fear. So isn't that a discrepancy when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says that the believers, that they would fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So why is it that they're not feeling the fear, but it also says that they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Isn't that a discrepancy? Let's see. Number one is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, La khawfun alayhim, all right, that on them there is no fear. Why? Because you wouldn't fear that they are basically away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's security. But we had seen a lot of mu'mineen actually die and actually go through a lot of different harm. How do we explain that? Who wants to answer? Why would they go into a lot of different things? How is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet actually says that in Allah idha habba al-mu'min ibtalah, if the Lord Almighty, when the Lord Almighty loves a believer, he would test him. So there's khawf. Now the way they relate with the different calamities is different than anyone else. The way they relate with them. So a calamity, for example, all right, you would see that a person probably lost a child. The way that a believer relates to it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never leave them in that calamity. So what does that mean? That the Lord Almighty will compensate them. That the Lord Almighty is going to make that child be a doorway to Jannah. That the Lord Almighty will never let two calamities overcome one ease, but the opposite. So whenever you would get a calamity, you would expect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually testing you. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم. Did you think that you're going to enter Jannah when you did not get tested like the previous nations have been tested? So to be tested actually means to be tested in wealth, health, in your children, in your life, all those different tests. So وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ means what? The relationship with, in where how they deal with the different calamities is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, one, لا خوف عليهم. They would know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُدَافِعُ عَنْ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, that the Lord Almighty will be the one to protect the believers. And therefore, don't fear, they don't feel the fear on Judgment Day. And even in this dunya, they don't fear the materialistic things. Why? Because their focus is on the Lord Almighty. In other words, their observation is not like anyone else. The way they view even hardship, rizq, they know that the Lord Almighty is a razaq. Even if they lost their job and got unemployed, they won't go into, oh, well, that's it, I'm going to start drinking, or I'm going to go suicide, because they know that rizq is not coming through the job. The job is a means, not what brings the money. What brings the money is Allah. Health, same thing, health. Whenever you would go, for example, through an illness, the doctor or the insurance or whatever it is, those are means, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that brings her health. So for a believer, لا خوف عليهم, they don't fear. Why? Because they just fear their Lord Almighty. And on Judgment Day, when everyone else is living the fear, they're actually living in security. What is the security that they're living? They know that they were blessed to not actually have lived before in dunya in the sin that other people are right now recognizing that this is the day that they'll be held accountable for their deeds. So they'll recognize that, oh, alhamdulillah, I didn't commit any of that. So what would they be? They would not be living in that fear. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, in where they would not be living in sorrow. But here's one thing. If you look at these two terms, all right, this is actually a verb. This is not a verb. So if we look at these two things, وَلَا خَوْفٌ, so there's absolutely no fear. But the word يَحْزَنُونَ is a verb in where it's actually talking about some form or some, when we're talking about verbs, we're talking about action, something continuous. So why in this word, وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ? So when we say لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, there's no fear on them. When everyone else is feeling the fear, there's no fear. It's not that they're not feeling, they're not fearing. In other words, in certain times, there will be some form of fear because it's part of human nature. There's some fear. Is every fear necessarily wrong? No, there's some fear that is part of our human nature. It is not related to the religion. So for example, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, what was he running away from? A lot of the fears. If you could say Prophet Musa alayhi salam is probably the most prophet that had the word fear in the story was very often. Mom was fearing, he was fearing and running away. He was fearing, the magicians were living in fear. Fear was always present in the story. Asya fearing, you see fear, there was always fear in the story. From the very beginning of, in fact, before even Musa was even born, mom was afraid. So what did she do? She basically throws him in the sea and she yells out and she was afraid. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إن كادت لتبدي به لولا أن ربطنا على قلبها. She was about to reveal the truth about Prophet Musa alayhi salam when Asya wanted to conceal the truth about this little child. Asya claimed that it was her son. So the mom was definitely provoked. What? Right before my eyes, my baby is going to be taken away and someone else is going to claim him right before my eyes, right there. And I'm right there nursing my own baby and somebody else is actually claiming that this baby belongs to them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says she was about to reveal the secret, but it wasn't until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لولا أن ربطنا على قلبها. If it only that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word rabt ala al-qalb is actually a metaphor and not to be translated literally. Let me give the literal wording. The literal wording is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not tie her heart, this is the literal wording, but that's not an actual translation because this is actually a metaphor. And we're wanted to say that, it's like the heart, whenever you're feeling afraid, your heart is like trembling. You would feel it like, it's like your heart is trembling. So the Lord Almighty, rabatna ala qalbiha, and where it's like a metaphor, it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was holding the heart. It's like putting it in his arms and just calming it down. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. It's kind of like when somebody comes to you and when you're feeling afraid and somebody puts their arms around you in order to calm you down and tell you, don't panic, everything's going to be okay. So the Lord Almighty tells you that no, he'll actually come in, not pat your back, but embrace your heart. Embrace your heart. لولا أن ربطنا على قلبي. It's like, embrace your heart. Calm you down from within. Calm her down from within. Not from the outside, from within. So لولا أن ربطنا على قلبها. So here, ولا هم يحزنون, in where they would not be in any sorrow. When ولا هم يحزنون. So it seems that this is more related, ولا خوف عليهم, more related to the akhirah, but scholars have differences of opinions on whether it's akhirah and dunya. ولا هم يحزنون was actually a verb in where even in the dunya, they don't feel that sorrow. Why don't they feel that sorrow? They don't feel the sorrow because they relate to everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they view things differently. Instead of viewing things that, yes, this is an illness and that's it, they would view that shifa is from Allah. We talked about that before. Instead of feeling the weakness, they would feel that the power is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he controls everything. So therefore, any type of sorrow or any type of sadness, go beyond it because you connect yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min ar-riba. O you who believe. So how many times did it actually say, O you who believe? All right, so let's do it right here. Here, inna alladhina amanu. Oh, inna alladhina amanu. And right here, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So now it's directing its talk. Now, whenever you see ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, it's not necessarily telling you, oh, if you're not part of the mu'mineen, don't do that. No, it's actually telling you, well, if you want to be part of the alladhina amanu, it's calling you. Who wants to be an A student? And they're all lined up. Are they all A students? For sure not. Only a few people. So usually it's probably just a couple. If we have a class of 40 people, it's probably maybe 6, 7 people would be A students. 80 people of Jalut. Okay. 80 people would be, maybe 70% of the students were probably within the 80s and then so forth. No? 300 out of 80,000. Okay. We will be within the 80s. 80s. Okay. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله. But I thought they were mu'mineen. Just like يا أيها النبي اتق الله. So if somebody would to tell you to have taqwa, wait a minute, what is having taqwa anyways? What is having taqwa? Having taqwa was actually explained by Ali ibn Abi Talib and even others.
Avoid the halal.
No, because it is al-iman بالتنزيل والاستعداد ليوم الرحيل. It's basically believing in the tanzil. What is it tanzil? In the revelation. الاستعداد ليوم الرحيل, it's preparing yourself for the day of journey. What day of journey? This is not talking about day of journey where you're going for your honeymoon. Going for the maut, going for death. All right. And العمل is also استعداد الإيمان بالتنزيل, استعداد ليوم الرحيل. And العمل as well, where العمل بالتنزيل as well, where you're actually making it into an action. اتقوا الله, and I forgot to actually mention, so what's the difference between لا خوف عليهم and taqwa?
But the taqi people, they protect being on the right path. Sometimes that, remember you taught us one day, you explained it so good.
One day.
They would go to a restaurant, but like even if it's doing something with halal, but it's
So right.
drop into the halal.
Right. So for taqwa can actually be related to khawf. But some of the khawf, all right, like we said earlier, some of the khawf is basically part of our instinct. All right. Some of the khawf is part of our instinct. Now, what khawf should we avoid as Muslims? So there are a number of things that we need to avoid as Muslims. Number one is that the khawf, in where you fear different materialistic things, whether it's people or whether it's things, and actually get out of your deen. What does getting out of your deen actually mean? Getting out of iman, or getting out of principle. Let's do it again. So what does that look like? Getting out of iman and getting out of principle. How does that happen? So getting out of iman, in where, for example, a person had a calamity and they're like, I don't believe in God anymore. Let's just say this. They said, I don't believe in God anymore. If he were just, he wouldn't have let that happen. Why did he do this to me? That's actually kufr. And a lot of people would actually go out of iman because of that. It's called the problem of evil, or theodicy, in where they would think, exactly, absolutely, in where if God, they would say, if God was there, then he would bring all good, and not recognize that to assume that all evil is from God is actually wrong. God Almighty does not create absolute evil, right? The Lord Almighty is absolute just, all right? But some of the things that he created can actually have evil in it. You may not recognize, but the Lord Almighty does not create absolute evil. Now, the other thing is that when we're talking about al-khawf, the other type of fear, in where somebody might actually fear, for example, a leader, fear losing their job, fear losing an advantage, or maybe getting picked on, any advantage in the dunya. So she basically fears that she probably might give up on her hijab, give up on her deen, give up on her salah, because she's afraid of people, society, advantage, a job, a money, whatever it is. All right. So that's actually the wrong fear. That fear is going to take them out of their iman without them recognizing. That's a haram fear. So وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, in where they would recognize that the Lord Almighty is Allahu Akbar, that the Lord Almighty is beyond all. Don't fear people. And therefore, when we talk about لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, why don't the believers actually feel the fear? Because no fear to them but one fear, that is Allah Almighty. So everything else, they would recognize it as doesn't mean anything to them because they know rizq is from Allah, health is from Allah, advantages are from Allah. So what do? They actually connect themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not with people. So what do they live? They live not only in principle, but they live with honor. They live with honor. That's why for a Muslim, it's all about preserving the honor of the Lord Almighty. It's all about that. And that's why if a person believes in the word Allahu Akbar, they would not be dishonored. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them honor. Why? Because the second that they embrace Allahu Akbar, they know that nothing can humiliate them. No one can abuse them because no one can control their rizq, can control their advantage, can control their rank, can control their life, can control their health, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they would live with an actual honor. That's why for a Muslim, it's all about preserving the honor of Allah Almighty. That's why for a Muslim, you would say Allahu Akbar. That's why that word is so scary, right? You say Allahu Akbar and you might get off the plane, girl.
But if you translate it, it's so beautiful and easy. God is great.
God is great. Don't get humiliated from anyone, right? Allahu Akbar, right? Stand up high, stand up strong. Don't get humiliated. Don't let anybody take advantage of you. No one owns your rizq. No one owns your health. No one owns your life. Only Allah. So you only connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا. Oh, what was the other word? Oh, the taqwa. I didn't answer that question. So when looking at taqwa, so if a person fears Allah, how is that related to love? So fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, then run to Allah. If you fear Allah, wait a minute. If you're afraid of something, you run away from it, not run to it. If you're afraid of something, you run away from it, not run to it. Is that a discrepancy? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that you run to the Lord Almighty because you know He controls all the matters. Why? Because له مقاليد السماوات والأرض. So the Lord Almighty is the only one that you fear Him and you run to Him. You fear Him and you run to Him. Why? Because you believe He is merciful. Whoever runs to Him, He will not harm him. Because the Lord Almighty is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Whoever runs to Him shall not find fear. Right? You run to your mama, what does she do? Right? Even though she'll be so angry, and you come to her and you just, Mama, I love you, Mama. Even though she was right there, so angry, and I'm going to beat everything out of you. But the second you give her a hug, she all of a sudden melts. Starts giving you a hug and starts kissing you. Wait a minute. I thought you were going to beat her up. What happened? Right? If that is a khuluq, if that is a khuluq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in the heart of a mother, imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love and mercy and rahmah. Let's just, we're here, not necessarily talking about that. It depends on the context. Sometimes if they recognize that they had made something wrong, done something wrong, sometimes it's like, okay, it's, just like when we say, winning the heart is actually your way to winning sometimes an argument. So it's not always the same. It depends on the context. So not always, don't always rush. Sometimes, you don't want to always rush in uquba. If you rush in punishment, sometimes you will actually lose the person in front of you. It needs a lot of hikmah. It's not easy. But the Lord Almighty, the most important thing is shahid here is that how we run to our mothers, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even said that أنا الرحمن خلقت الرحم وشققت له اسما من اسمي. He said, I am Ar-Rahman. I am the most merciful. خلقت الرحم, and I created the womb. And in fact, I gave it a name, Rahim, which means a womb. But in English, it doesn't really give the meaning because the womb is not conjugated from the word mercy. But in Arabic, it is. In Arabic, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahm. Ar-Rahm is actually coming from the root Rahima, which actually means to give mercy. You see the conjugation? And in Arabic, to give mercy, and the Lord Almighty is the merciful. And he said, I actually gave the womb, Rahm, in Arabic, part of my name. Rahman, Rahm. Why? Because it relates to mercy. That's in order to bring about that, what a woman really has is farther than just a female giving birth. She was actually the source of mercy, the source of love, the source of affection, and the source of emotion. See that? It's subhanAllah, it's beautiful. No, I'm not sure what, وَشَقَقْتُ لَهُ إِسْمًا مِنْ إِسْمِي. And he said, فَمَنْ وَصَلَهَا وَصَلْتُ. Whoever reaches out to the woman that is the mother, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, here, Rahim is actually the sisters, mothers, aunts, etc. Whoever reaches out to them, in other words, visits them, takes care of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come to them. Is it that Allah comes to them? In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cover their matters. فَمَنْ وَصَلَهَا وَصَلْتُ. You reach him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reach you. All right? So here, وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَى, and leave what remains min al-riba. So what is that? Ittaqullah. So taqwa is related that you actually remember and recognize the Lord Almighty's power. You recognize the Lord Almighty's power, authority. You recognize the love that you have for Allah Almighty. So it's hope, fear, and love. So what is it? You leave something because you recognize the power of the Lord Almighty, the authority of the Lord Almighty. All right? So what do? You also hope that the Lord Almighty would compensate you for whatever you are given up on. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, whoever leaves something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, عَوَضَهُ اللَّهُ خَيْرًا مِنْهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate them something better. Will compensate them something better. My sister, she was telling me the other day. So she was actually coming here, and this is just on a side, okay? And my uncle offered her a business class ticket. Bought her a business class ticket. And I said, what did you do in your life that made you get a business class ticket? You must have done some kind of a good deed. She said, as a matter of fact, I did. So one time, by mistake, I bought my sister from a business class ticket for $600. This is real. By mistake, how did I come across a business class ticket for $600? Subhanallah. So it was from Tel Aviv to Minneapolis. But in that business class seat, there was a guy that was sitting in front of her, right in front of her, and she just felt not comfortable and felt that was a fitna. So she said, I gave up on my business class seat and I actually sat in the economy ones. And she sat in the economy chair and she was like, but I really needed that business class seat so bad. But because I felt there was a fitna from that guy, I gave up on it. Wallahi al-azim. And she said, and Rabbil Alameen compensated me, wallahi, a better business class. And I said, La ilaha illallah. You know, wonder, what did you do to get a business class ticket? All the way, you know, that's a very expensive ticket. It's 3,000 something. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, it's like, nope, you're getting a business class because of, and I said, how long ago was that? She was like, it was almost 10 years ago. And Rabbil Alameen will compensate you. Rabbil Alameen will compensate you. Subhanallah. وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا. ذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا. And leave what was remained from the interest. What interest? The interest. So if the person basically made a transaction, right, and there was, let's say, 2% or 4% that was interest. So it would be part of taqwa, even though the money is there, but you're giving up on that money for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're giving up on what money? The interest, just the interest piece of it. All right. Even though you would have taken it and no one would recognize, but you know that the Lord Almighty, because of your love for Allah Almighty, you would hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would compensate you. So what do? You consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's authority. All right. 3 things. All right. So what is taqwa? 3 things. You love Allah Almighty. So you fear Allah Almighty's power, and you would hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would compensate you something better. Oh, beautiful, huh? Now that's what taqwa means. Taqwa is these 3 items. It's not just the fear, but it's actually love, hope, and fear within it. In kuntum mu'minin. Why in kuntum mu'minin when he already said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu? Because when you look at Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, this is calling on to the believers. This is what you need to do. Whenever you would see in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, this is telling you, if you want to be part of those people, well, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. And you start seeing, does that description fit me? Should I do something to be part of those people? And then here in kuntum mu'minin, to also emphasize, if you're really true believers, then you have to leave interest entirely. So why is Islam against interest so much? What is up with interest? A number of different things. Number one is that because of the harm that it will cause in inflation. That's number one. So on the economy, let's actually put the DNAIM here, okay? So because of the fact that it might actually harm the economical side, inflation. 2, because of the fact that it might actually cause the social distrust and disconnection, in where people's relationship will then abuse people's needs, and instead of making and creating a bond between the society, what do? They're abusing people's needs. And once somebody abuses people's needs, that actually brings in a form of slavery, in a form of distrust, a form of abuse and injustice. So that's for the I. 3, once you're actually engaging in a form of distrust and all that, then you're abusing somebody's energy and somebody's mind. And that actually brings in another form of injustice. Then you're abusing their life. You're abusing their needs. You're abusing their life, and you're probably even abusing their children, because they would see them as the replacement for the money. They would see them as property. And then you're abusing that person's life and health just to pay back if there was an interest on that money. And of course, it takes away the person's deen, because the Prophet ﷺ actually said that if a person were to actually commit adultery with their own mother 70 times, it would be easier than doing riba in interest. Yep. So scary. Why? Because it involves more than just one person's relationship. It actually involves breaking the whole ties of all the DNAIM that I mentioned.
Um,
Yes, ma'am.
is interest form of
Raise your voice, my dear.
is interest is a form of making profit? What's the difference when somebody's making interest?
We mentioned that one before. Isn't an interest a form of making profit? We mentioned that one before, in where we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that أحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. What is the difference between bay' and riba? Let's actually do this little right there and clarify what is the difference. So the difference between bay', let's put bay' in where you're talking about two people here, in where these two people, they actually have goods. In other words, they are trading an equal production or an equal good. All right. But in riba, one has the goods and he is the upper hand, and the other one is actually in need. So Islam regarded, if two people are trading goods, in other words, they're doing a barter right there, they're trading goods, that actually makes justice because they are equal. They both have an item and they want to trade. But in the situation of riba, it is not equal, because one person has the upper hand in where they have the goods, and the other person has the need. So Islam regarded that a person in the upper hand to abuse the person's need is actually going to create an injustice. So therefore, they're not actually similar, and they're not actually in the similar situation. In other words, it's not a trade, and therefore riba cannot be whatsoever equivalent to barter or any selling, because this is trading good with good. Both are on the same level, but in this, both are not on the same level. In other words, they're not both on the same economical status, and certainly not on the same level of social status.
If I bought a
So if we're talking about difference in economical status and the difference in the social status, that would actually create an injustice, and that, historically speaking, that is actually one of the main means to slavery. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid riba because of the fact of how much harm it will actually generate within the society, where it would make the person that is in need be a forever and probably a permanent slave, whether that was a direct slave or whether that was an indirect slave, always to the capitalist right there, to the person that had the upper hand, which was the person that is going to be a rich person. So Islam regarded that to abuse and to give the rich the upper hand, to abuse the poor and their needs, is actually going to continue in producing more feudalism and capitalism. So Islam considered that no, in order to end capitalism and in order to end abuse, riba must be ended, and whatsoever not be equivalent to transaction, selling, in where they're both on the same social and economical status, in where they both are doing a barter in trading goods. Go ahead.
So the lifestyle we are here, if I bought from you a car or a house, you have to make profit from it, right?
That's a sale. If
So I
I'm
just
selling,
wanted to understand it.
right. So what is the difference between a sale and that? A sale is different. So a sale in where I would basically have, whether the goods is basically goods to mean a merchandise, or whether the goods was to mean money. So in Islam, if I have a phone, and this phone, and I wanted to sell my phone for $300, even though it's probably worth $500, but I was willing to sell it, you made a profit out of it. But if I wanted to sell it for $1,000, even though it's worth 400, but you were accepting and you were okay with this transaction, well, good for me because I just made $600. Thank you very much. This profit is permissible. All right, this profit is permissible. Why? Because there was one, consent. Two, we both had goods. We both had goods. I had the phone, you had the money, we accepted. But this is riba is actually going in two ways. Riba, we said riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'a. To abuse, so yes, I did take money, $600, for example, in another situation of riba, in where I might have actually taken $1,000 for you or from you, $1,000 from you, but to abuse my need for the money and ask me to pay a profit of $200 in Islam to actually abuse the need and charge my need $200 or whatever value is actually considered injustice in Islam.
Even if you agree.
What? Even if you agree. Even if you agree. Well, not only did Islam regard that abusing somebody's need as an injustice, but Islam actually considered whether the person agreed or whether there was a person that was writing the contract or whether the person was working for a company that does these contracts is all considered haram. All of it. Because Islam wanted the whole society, the whole system down, and the whole society to actually work in support of giving support to the needy and not abuse their need. You understand what I'm saying? So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in that ayah. Let's go back to the ayah and actually see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the whole system to fall down in terms of riba. Any system that does that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's go look at this ayah. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. What was the story behind this? And if you don't do that, then be prepared for a war from God Almighty and His Prophet. To do what? What happened here? What happened was the people of Thaqif, the people of Ta'if, it was a tribe. They said, we believe in Islam, but we'll become Muslim, but we just need one thing. We had already made a number of different business contracts from a tribe, and it was going to be a lot of money. That was going to be an investment. Before we had become Muslim, we made this basically business, and that was going to bring us a lot of income. So we'll become Muslim, but let's delay implementing the riba rule on us until we get the money. So Islam says, you take Islam entirely or you leave it. So the ayah said, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, if you don't actually take Islam entirely and you do it in that way, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, then prepare for a battle to be waged from the Lord Almighty and His Prophet against you. Don't give up Islam and don't start breaking up Islam. Don't expect Islam to bend for you. Even if you thought, I'll add another number to the Muslims. Islam won't bend for you. Haqq is haqq. If you don't want to practice it, you'll be sent for it. But the Lord Almighty's principle is there. Don't let Islam and don't expect Islam to bend for you. You bend for Allah.
We bend for Islam.
You bend for Islam. You bend for Allah.
So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's say you need a car and then you went to a Muslim dealer, and then the car was what, let's say, $3,000.
Oh, hold on. Say it again.
So you need a car.
You need a car.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need a car. Then you went to a guy, and then the dealership. I mean, he asked. The car was like $3,000. You don't have that money, and then he asked you if you want to do month-to-month payment, whereby he said 3,000 if you want to pay, like you gotta pay 3,000 like front, or I'm gonna charge you $2,000 extra, like it's gonna be 5,000, and then you pay monthly.
Okay.
So
I see your question. If let's say I've got a car, okay, how do you draw a car? Okay. Okay. Sorry, you guys. Yeah, here's my little car. Okay. This car has a sale of $3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. $3,000. Now, the dealer tells you, I'll sell it to you in installments.
yeah, I mean, if
Okay.
you don't have the money-
Installments. All right. In order to pay off the whole thing. But if you don't want to pay the entire price right now, $3,000, then fair enough. I'll actually make the price, if you decide to pay it in installments, I'll make it $5,000. $5,000 if you want to pay it in installments.
Okay.
That is actually called al-murabaha.
And it's accepted.
Hold on. This is called al-murabaha. What is al-murabaha? Al-murabaha is just that. Now, why is that permissible? On a condition that the $5,000 is a fixed price and not a changing price.
That's acceptable.
So hold on. So what does that mean? So you would say, okay, $5,000. Why is that acceptable? According to some scholars or many scholars in our modern times, because this is putting a new price, but must be fixed. If it is not a fixed price, in where if you make a delayed payment, you are charged for that, that would be riba. Got it? So let's say you were to pay $200 a month in order to make a total of $5,000. All right. Now, if let's say you were charged a late payment fee because you were late on your monthly fee, that would be riba. That would be interest. So what makes al-murabaha? There is no late fee. It's a fixed price. $5,000 fixed price. Yes, it's $5,000, even though if you were to pay it up front, he was willing to take $3,000. Can we do what is called al-arbun, like a down payment, in where, hey, I'm going to be paying in order to show you that I'm really interested in this car. I don't have the money right now, but I will pay like an upfront. So I will pay because I don't want Khadija taking the car before me. I will show the seller my real interest and that I'm committed. So I'll probably pay $500 up front. The $500 should be part of the actual price. You subtract it from that. You were saying, my dear.
Yeah, the person who is making interest, if you add up, maybe at the end of the year, 2 years, 60,000.
That's true.
This person
It can be, but Islam is telling you, that's why Islam is telling you, we need to make sure that you understand and that it's a fixed price, that the number is not going to multiply, because the number multiplying is the most dangerous thing, because you start becoming enslaved by the seller, by the numbers multiplying. So Islam wanted to make sure that he understands that there is a fixed number, and that the price for this, the value, is going to be clear, and that you will not make this this car that is only worth $5,000 by probably some time that it will be multiplied, and then probably with the multiplication maybe becoming $10,000 when it's only worth 5,000.
Oh, what do you multiplication?
Multiplication,
No,
interest.
interest is multiplied.
Oh, girl, you better believe it.
It's not like it's 2% of 100% divided by 12 months, then you don't pay her.
This is an accountant right there. So she worked at a bank. She knows how things work. All right, go ahead, my dear.
Let's say from the 3,000, the guy said, okay, I will, in order for you to get the car, I will charge you an extra 5,000, and the car is like 8,000. Is that allowed?
Say it again.
Flipping it out.
Yeah, because you don't want to take interest, but he's adding like, because a lot of people don't go into the Islamic way of doing
Islamic way of
housing.
banking, because they rip
Banking,
you off.
exactly. They do that
More
like
expensive
that.
than the car.
So he is charging what? So the car is $5,000.
I mean, the house. The house is
Okay, so
300,000, right?
Okay.
If you buy it with Islamic, it's like if you go to the bank, the interest is 1.1% maybe.
Mhm.
The Islamic bank calls it profit.
Right. So here's one thing. There are a lot of the so-called Islamic banking. Not every so-called Islamic banking is actually following al-murabaha. Not every Islamic banking is following that. There are so-called Islamic banking, Islamic banks that actually claim to do murabaha, when in reality, it has nothing to do with murabaha. It is nothing but a way to get different types of customers. Okay, so just make sure you actually understand the whole way that it's done, and that no one's abusing the word and making riba and giving it a murabaha name.
Yeah, because a lot of people are using that. I mean,
I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar with it. All right, so let's continue. وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُم. So if you in tubtum, who was that ayah talking to at the time? Well, basically Thaqif, the main tribe from Ta'if. That if you basically repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you would only get the net of your money. In other words, you had given a loan for $10,000, for example. That's all you get. You just get the $10,000. You can't make a profit of a loan that you had made. You can't make a profit out of that, because making a profit out of somebody's need in Islam is a form of slavery and a form of injustice. لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. In that situation, you're not abusing someone, and you're not being abused. لا تظلمون. You won't abuse someone, and you're not being abused. Goes both ways. Absolutely goes both ways. In other words, Islam is telling you, don't accept to be abused. Islam is telling you, don't accept to be abused.
How about you're real in need?
You're really in need. Islam is telling you, don't accept to be abused. Even if you are in need, your honor is the greatest value. Your deen is the greatest value.
That's the story of the people, what are they called? Abu Huraira. They refused food when they're hungry because of their own.
Absolutely. وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. So what if the person actually abused? So the one in need, all right, he did actually borrow money. And this guy, the person that basically gave him the money, he's waiting, and every single day he's like, where's my money? Where's my money? And every single day, I'm sorry, I'm trying, I'm working, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. At the end of the day, is that if a person is ذُو عُسْرَة, what is al-usra? Poverty. They're going through poverty. فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. Wait till they basically start getting the wealth and things become easy for them. All right. And there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, Tabari actually narrated it, in where whenever the person leaves, in other words, gives the person the time for every single day, that would be actually considered a sadaqah. وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. What is تصدقوا? تصدقوا is to basically give the sadaqah, in where, you know what, you're taking probably from that loan and say, you know what, I'll make it from $10,000, I'll make it into $800, for example, or 10,000. Okay, yeah. خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. So what is that wanting to say? In where you're recognizing the person's need and you're giving them a sadaqah, you're trying to support. And this is actually to bring a clarification that the main reason why riba was forbidden was in order to bring about this connection between the upper class and the lower class, in where you're letting the upper class recognize the need of the lower class, and that they're actually giving and showing that affection, and showing also the financial support. So that's why وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It's like, you know what, give it as a sadaqah. You recognize their needs, so give it as a sadaqah. إن كنتم تعلمون واتقوا يوما ترجعون فيه إلى الله ثم توفى كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون. What is واتقوا? And fear taqwa. This is the last ayah to be revealed before the Prophet's death. Some scholars said it was revealed 21 days before his death. Some said it was a couple months, 4 months, 9 months. And some said it was 3 days before his death. 3 days, that is the last ayah to be revealed in the Quran, period. What does it mean? And fear the day that you will return to your Lord Almighty. Then every soul will be held accountable for what they had done, and they will not be under any injustice from the Lord Almighty. Scary ayah, huh? That is the last ayah to be revealed, right here. The last ayah. And fear a day that you will be returning to your Lord. There is another qira'ah, تَرْجِعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. When you will return to your Lord, and then every soul will be held accountable for what it has committed. وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And they will not be under any injustice from the Lord Almighty. So وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Is this to mean death? That we should fear the day that we will die in it? Most of the scholars actually said yes. Why? Because they said ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ. So some scholars said ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ to mean that every soul will actually taste the taste of death. And the other scholars that said that no, ترجعون or ترجعون, this is two قراءات, ترجعون فيه إلى الله or ترجعون فيه إلى الله, that you will be returned to your Lord. And then here ثم توفى, and then every soul will be held accountable. ما كسبت, what they had committed. In other words, what they had committed in this dunya. وهم لا يظلمون, because the Lord Almighty, whether you had done good or whether you had done wrong, it will be basically what will determine your Jannah or your hellfire. It's basically what you do, what decisions you had made. Now we get to the last right there, the longest ayah in the Quran. All right, we'll stop right now. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا تداينتم بدين. So this is the longest ayah in the Quran. It's a whole page. This ayah alone has 30 rulings. 30 rulings, just this ayah alone, 30 rulings. Oh yeah, we're going to go over the whole thing. We're going to go over the whole thing. So it is actually talking about debt and borrowing money and loan, and what are the conditions related to loan. But there's so many different details that Many times, people would take, for example, little small parts of the ayah, for example, and start wondering, okay, how do I understand this one and that one? So it will definitely take us more than a day, but inshallah, we still have to understand the longest ayah in the Quran. All right? For the ayat al-dain, that this is the longest ayah. Allah, okay. Well, now you know it. So it's ayah 282 in the Quran. All right, and now you know that this ayah was the last ayah in Revelation. Let's see. So what about Islamic mortgages? We drinking or eating with the right hand is sunnah, sister, not fard. So eating and drinking with the right hand, is it a sunnah or is it a fard? Differences of opinions between scholars, and the reason why they had differences of opinions is because the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahabi to eat with the right hand. And then when the man refused and he said, I can't, but I can't. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Mastatat. Now the scholars had different interpretations. The man was never capable of raising his arm again. Was that was the Prophet ﷺ to tell him, Mastatat, may you never will, or something like that? Was that because he was dishonoring the Prophet, or was it because he was dishonoring the order itself? Differences of opinions between scholars. In Nawawi, in al-Majmu', which is one of the most important books of comparative fiqh, he actually considered that it is a sunnah and not fard. That it is a sunnah to eat with the right hand and not necessarily fard. So why would he consider it sunnah, not fard? That the Prophet ﷺ ate with the right hand, he recommended eating with the right hand, but there was no hadith or an ayah to say that the ramifications of not doing so is in any way leading to hellfire or any punishment or any punishment in the akhirah or in the dunya. So they regarded that sin is if there is a text, Quran or Sunnah, that regarded that if you are not to practice, that you will be punished, or you will have some kind of an accountability on Judgment Day, whether in hellfire or reducing sins, etc., or maybe the person will be damned or getting out of the mercy. So you could see that in most of the ahadith, in fact, in all of the ahadith that speak of eating with the right hand, that it was talking about it as a recommendation and did not mention any form of a punishment. Not mention any form of punishment. So in Nawawi, consider that the preponderant is that it is a sunnah and not an obligation. Do you guys understand now what the difference between an obligation and a sunnah is? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Any questions before we go? Was it Saadiya? Yes.
What about college loans? Like, let's take a loan out of college.
That's a good question. For college loans, the committee of fuqaha in the US, they considered that doing an undergrad with the college loans would only be permissible if you had deprived the different sources that will offer you that halal with no interest. So for example, you tried to get your grades up and you tried to get a scholarship, you tried to get a loan from your dad, you tried to get, different resources in order to not go into college loans, etc. You tried all your best. For undergrad, okay, you tried all your best, but you had, I guess it just didn't work out after trying all the means to find halal scholarships or whatever it is. and you had no way but to get a college loan. So you have to then go and deprive all the means to find a college loan that will not be, there's actually a whole lecture, I'll send it to you, in where you're trying as much as you can to find a loan in where that's not, what is the word? I forgot what the word was, but you're trying to find as much as you can in where it's a fixed loan as much as you can. If you couldn't find that type of loan in where it is fixed in any way, you're going to find the least interest as much as you can. And you're going to need to figure out a way to pay it before it starts doubling up. All right. So in other words, it is permitted only until you deprive all the different means. All right.
Have to go study halal. What if you take a loan haram to go study haram? Because some of the classes.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
want to call it and
Forgot about that one. Forgot about that one.
I went to school. They have a lot of classes that is just absolute haram.
Oh yeah.
Body politics, and they're teaching you all these types of gays people and all that stuff, and sociology and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So you can
I'm
pay
familiar with
haram
it.
fees, you have
Trust me.
stuff.
Even though, by the way, like back in the days when I was in school, all that stuff was actually illegal to teach. So what you know about America now is not America a long time ago. Totally different. America now is not America in the 80s. Totally different. And I really mean it. You know what? Even Islamic schools, and I will say this again and again, even Islamic schools, all right, are actually more deviant today than public schools at the time. Oh yeah. I really mean it. I really mean it. I really mean it. So it's really sad to say that. Really sad to say that. Oh, go ahead, my dear. What did you want to say, my dear? I like your.
Yeah. It's so easy. I just put it on.
You were saying
I got confused about that.
you got confused about the riba. Okay, fair enough. So riba nasi'a is all about taking a loan, all right, and charging you for the time. Okay, charging you for the time you've taken that loan. That's riba nasi'a. Riba al-fadl, I'm charging you for the good and the difference between what is actually another good that is equivalent to it. So for example, I've got Indian gold and I've got gold from Dubai. Okay, this is gold and this is gold. This is gold and this is gold. But to charge you, because this is Dubai gold, to charge you an increase in the amount, even though they were same weight, is actually riba. All right. And the change and the difference in weight is only to be considered in one: gold, silver, barley, wheat, dates, and salt. We're not talking about salt, Himalayan salt and salt. We're talking about minerals. Okay, so certain minerals. All right. Now, then you had the Shafi'i. They explained that no, it's not limited, according to the Shafi'i, it's not limited to barley, wheat, and dates and salt. They actually said no. Any food item, if you're selling me gala apples and Granny Smith, if I'm trading that 2 pounds for 2 pounds, not because Granny Smith, they are probably yummier or whatever it is, that you're taking the pink lady apples and saying, well, that one's different for Shafi'i. For all the other scholars, they said, no, this is not talking about apples. This is not talking about bananas, Bartlett bananas and whatever, Daju and all these different types of bananas or pears or whatever. No, this is talking about only dates, silver, gold, wheat, barley, and salt. So they said, if we're talking about dates, you can't sell me sukari dates and the ajwa dates and tell me sukari dates, the 3 pounds is costing this much, and I'm going to give you my ajwa dates, 2 pounds equivalent to 10 pounds of sukari dates. No, that's riba. Got it? Sukari dates, 10 pounds, for ajwa dates, 10 pounds. And you can't actually, if we're doing a barter, got it? If we're talking about dates, same thing. You can't sell me probably barley and say this barley was a production of, I don't know what state in the US. And then you got barley that's coming from China and say, well, I got a better barley. So no, barley and barley. Got it? What if the real price of that American barley was actually more expensive than the Chinese barley? I say, fair enough. You can buy it in cash, credit card, swipe it, but not a trade. Got it? So in that situation, you wanted to buy 10,000 pounds of barley, American barley, for, I don't know, $30,000, whatever the price. Never bought barley, so you excuse my numbers. All right. You wanted to buy this much for this much money, okay, in cash, but not do a trade. If let's just assume that it's more expensive because of production, quality, whatever it is, fair enough. Use money. You can use cash, but not trade in goods for those items. Got it? You guys understand what I'm saying? So in Islam, considered riba al-fadl, that you have to have the equivalent weight and also within time, and that we're talking about that the trade, the product is the same. So can I buy barley and actually buy it with gold? Yes, this is not the same. This is not involving riba.
Same item.
We're talking about same items. I trade in same items. So if you wanted to buy, I don't know, barley with gold, you don't have to, I'm selling you 10,000, or let's say I'm selling you 2 pounds of barley. Now I need 2 pounds of gold. These are two different things. No, if they're two, if those are two different items, that's up to you and how you want to make a profit and so forth. Got it? Okay, good. I'll let you guys go, and Allah barik fiku.
Sorry, guys. I still confused about the calculation you guys say.
Mhm.
For example, I bought from you phone for 1,000.
Okay.
Right? If you charge me by interest, let's say your interest is 3%, right? So 3% of 1,000 or 1%, the interest. If you charge me every month 1% interest,
Uh-huh.
so 1% of 1,000 is $10, right? $10.
Interest is haram.
I know. What I'm trying to say is the profit is a fixed. I'm just saying, if you told me if I charge you with a fixed amount for 2 years, I will increase from, it was 300 value, I will sell you like 500, right? For 3 years. That is halal, right?
Yeah,
I'm just saying, if that is halal, let's say you charge me with interest. I'm just saying the money, which one is more? If you just make simple the number, if your phone costs 1,000, you sold me 1,000, and you won't charge me 1% every month. So 1% of 1,000 is $10. So if I have to pay every month $100, so I will pay 110 this month. The next month, my principal is now instead of 1,000 is 900. So you're going to charge me 1% of 900 instead of 1,000. Am I right?
So here's the
Right?
thing.
So now when you add those interests, you get benefit from me in 2 years. It is the same as 200.
So here's the thing. Islam was concerned that we actually have a fixed price. So al-murabaha for the scholars, right. So for not all scholars agreed on al-murabaha, just to note. Okay. All right. What is al-murabaha? This is $500. All right. And if you wanted to pay them on installments, I will say you're going to need to pay $700. Okay. $700. Okay. Now, for not all scholars would agree that this is permissible, but I'm just telling you what some of the scholars regarded those that said al-murabaha was permissible. They said the whole, yarhamkumullah, they said the whole idea is on a fixed price, not fixed rate. Fixed price, right. So they said a fixed price, not fixed rate. There's a difference. So for a fixed price, that way we would actually say we're looking at $700. It's a clear amount. And that way we're not getting a fixed rate. Why? Because a fixed rate would actually mean this will be multiplied to another new final price later on. So Islam wanted to avoid making this new final price, and that if you're selling this for $700 at a fixed price, not fixed rate, because if what you were talking about is a fixed rate, Islam is talking about a fixed price.
At the end, what they're going to profit, that's what I was saying.
At the end, Islam tells you, well, we just want you to keep one fixed price. That way you would both agree on a specific item, and this is the value of the item, and that this item will not be later on from the value of $700 to probably the value of maybe 10,000 with a fixed rate. So Islam want to tell you, no, it's not the fixed rate only, but it's fixed price.
You mentioned out of all these items we exchange, we buy and sell things. Why only mention barley, silver?
Barley. So scholars had different. So scholars actually had differences of opinions on why these items. Some scholars said because of the value that they contain within people's lives. So if we're looking at gold, this actually means the value of money. And if we're looking at barley, wheat, dates, because they're because of the staple, because of the fact that they're actually people's lives actually depend on these items. So it's like not abusing people's main need for survival. So in other words, it's making what actually makes a real value in people's lives, that it is actually fixed in where you're not abusing people's needs. And that's why the whole idea about riba is not to abuse people's needs, whether we're abusing people's needs in what maintains their survival or whether what maintains their wealth. So you're not abusing people's needs in what gives them food, and you're not abusing people's needs in what gives them honor and maintains their wealth.
I have a question on
Qatar, how did we get in here? Okay. Okay.
I'm a little bit confused about Qatar. I don't know. I'm so mad at how they treat immigrants.
But also, I'm so happy how they're doing the World Cup with Quran and everything else. And I know the whole Western world is going to them and criticizing all these bad things that they do because of dictatorship and all that stuff. As a Muslim, where am I supposed to be? Should I hate the injustice and support my Muslim country? I don't know. It's Saudi just beat Argentina, and that's Muslim country, but I don't like the leadership of Saudi. I'm confused.
Who said that the Qatari leadership was any better?
When a Muslim is not practicing Islam, it pisses me off. But again, they're my Muslim. I have to stand
So,
with them.
you know, here's the thing.
What do you do?
And when we even look at even the whole situation, okay, when you look at, are we really going to necessarily support Islam and Muslims through the ball, FIFA?
No.
That's the whole idea.
Okay.
Are we really supporting a ball? Was ever in history Islam brought to the masses, to the people through a ball? Never. But here's the thing, if we're seeing people are running after a ball and I can exploit that for da'wah purposes,
Fine.
good, exploit it for da'wah purposes. If you're going to invite Zakir Naik, you're going to invite, du'as to actually give da'wah to the masses. I don't know if they would all care, but regardless, you're just, hey, they're all here. Let me just talk about Islam. They're coming here for ball and coming here to give them da'wah. Good for you. Why not? But definitely you could see that right now the media is trying to abuse the situation and for political reasons in order to demonize the Muslims, that, hey, they're actually against the LGBT and all that. There's no equity, injustice, and what is considered as the main slogan for inclusivity. Let's actually abuse the situation and do further demonizing to the Muslims and actually say, look, they're actually not pro-inclusivity, therefore they are pro-hate. That's the way the game and the narrative is created in the media. So it's like, let's abuse it. It definitely is not an issue of necessarily, Qatar as only a country, but it's to abuse this. It's basically to abuse anything related to the Muslims, in where it has to be, this image to demonize the Muslims and to create an image of threat, that these people are anti-liberalism, it's not that we're pro-liberalism, but it's because they would regard that liberalism is the paradigm to justice, is the path to lead to world peace and all that. And therefore, if you are actually against liberalism, therefore you are against world peace. Therefore, you are not inclusive, and therefore you are anti-human rights. So the right now trying to present the slogan of human rights, that it's all about giving people the right to marry in the way that liberalism is presenting marriage. So once they actually said objection, you will have your definition, but we're not going to necessarily bend our values to your definition. That's when they decided, well, let's wage a war on them and actually force them that you bend how we want you to bend. Alhamdulillah. And jazakumullah khairan everyone, and barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.